hello everyone. I'm going to be talking about Shinran, who is a figure from the refuge tree, and I'm particularly going to be talking about teaching of his, which is about the power of the lucid mind. The lucid mind, which is a really interesting word, lucid. It means clear, it means understanding reality, and it also comes from light, so it comes from the Latin, lux, which means light. And there's something for us humans, isn't there, about light, which is really important. The light outside tonight might be better in a way if we all just went outside and just sat in this light for 40 minutes, but I'm not going to do that. But there's something about light. We were just talking in the team meeting before this evening about our week, reporting in, and lots of people reported in about the nature of the light and how beautiful it was, how these clear blue skies, how the sunshine really opens our hearts in some way as humans. It really represents something to us. And it's used in many kind of different religions, I think, to express the truth, to express different states of consciousness. We can have a feeling of coming out of darkness towards the light. We can see the light. We can see the light when we see the truth. So light's a really strong image, a strong metaphor, something very powerful, I think. It's almost like I don't know if light can be an archetype, but there's something very archetypal about it. So this is a talk about light in some ways. It's a talk about the Buddha of infinite light, Amitabha, and it's in the context of the teachings of Shinran. So much of this talk is set in the world of poetic truth, the world of the imagination. Okay? It's truth that expresses a deeper reality, our experience. It expresses how we actually experience the world. Now, that might not actually be historical truth, or how things look from the outside, but that doesn't mean it isn't expressing a deeper truth, a truth. Okay, so Shinran. So as you probably know, we're some of the way through now a series, a year-long series, which is looking at the refuge tree, this tree. And we find ourselves now looking at the teachers of the past, the Japanese teachers, and Shinran is one of those. So he was around in the 12th and 13th century. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say I don't actually know which one of those figures he was, but we reckon it's one of the Japanese ones. Which one is he, do you think?
I think he's the really grumpy.
Well, there's one who's got like a baseball bat, he's got a hit in his hands. I don't think he's that one. We wonder if he was the one, he's grumpy and he's kind of counting beads, perhaps. Yeah. He shouldn't be grumpy, he should be really happy. Okay, so Shinran is a really important teacher in the Pure Land tradition. And the Pure Land tradition is a tradition of Buddhism that's still going very strong today, actually. Many millions of Buddhists in the world practice Pure Land, particularly in Japan. And though we were just again having a discussion before this, and it was a question whether actually what they practice in Japan nowadays is actually Pure Land as it was taught by Shinran and other teachers. In some ways, like many religions, it seems to have kind of grown into something else. But I'm very much talking about how Shinran taught it at the time, back in the 11th, 12th century. And it's one of the most popular, forms of Buddhism in the world today. Interestingly, in Pure Land Buddhism, people don't meditate. And in fact, they don't really do very much at all, it seems like. They chant. And which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because we know our Western view of what Buddhism is that it's about meditation. It's about working very hard, okay? And that's not what Shinran necessarily taught. Okay. So I'm going to start off with a little story. And this is about where does the idea of Pure Land come from? So the story is set at the time of the Buddha. And the Buddha used to really like to go and to a place called Vulture's Peak. Vulture's Peak is high up, quite high up, sort of rock outcrop, big outcrop, and it overlooks a valley. And I think at that time it's probably a very beautiful and very peaceful space. Maybe not now. And and you can go to Watcher's Peak and you can see where the Buddha was. You can even see where he did his walking meditation every day, where he used to teach. And near to where the Buddha used to teach, where lots of people used to come and see him, there's a city called Rajagriha. I think you pronounce it like that. And Rajagriha at that time was a really big city. It was like the place of power of that particular area of India. And Rajagriha had a king who supported the Buddha a lot. However, the king had a very bad son, sadly. And his son really wanted power now. He didn't want to wait till his father died and he could have power. He wanted it now. So what he did is he kind of staged a coup, overthrew his father and locked his father up. Locked him up in a room with 7 walls. I don't know why that's important, but anyway, 7 walls. And he locked him up in that room and he didn't give him any food. So presumably the idea was that the king would just die slowly and then the son would be able to take power. However, the king's wife came to visit the king every day in his imprisonment. And what she did, according to the story, was she would wash herself and then she would cover herself in ghee, honey, and sort of all mixed up in corn flour. So she'd kind of rub it all over her body. And then she'd put grape juice in the garlands she wore, okay? And then she'd go and see the king, and he'd presumably... Doesn't say exactly what happened in the sutra, but anyway. Anyway, time went by, 3 weeks went by, and the king asked for the warder to come and see him. And he said, so how's my father doing? And the warden said, well, actually he's doing really well. Very healthy, very happy. And so the king who'd now taken over the power, his name was Ajatasattu. Ajatasattu got in a really terrible mood when he heard this. He grabbed his sword and he wanted to go and kill his mother. He was so angry with her, he just wanted to go and kill her. And luckily, 2 of his advisors were there and they stopped him. And they said, if you know, there have been many bad kings in history who have killed their fathers to get power, but killing your mother is another thing altogether. If you do that, we're going to leave you, So he didn't kill her, decided not to kill her, but what he did is he locked her up. So he locked her up in a palace. And the ruins of that palace are still there today. You can go and visit them, as some of us did, go and sit in those palaces. And so it's interesting because the palace is very close to where the Buddha would have been teaching. I think you could almost see it from where the palace is. If not quite see it, it's just a few miles away. So the queen found herself locked up, and basically her life as a queen was over. I don't think her son was going to kill her, but she no longer had any power. She was locked up. She also had the knowledge that she had a son who had committed such an awful act. And I presume that her husband was slowly dying as well. So she was in quite a bad place. And she broke down and she wept. It says she wept like a shower of rain. And what she particularly wept about, as well as those other things, is she called out to the Buddha. She called out to him and she said, I used to be able to go and hear you teach. I used to be able to be in your presence. And in fact, you used to send Ananda, your precious companion, to come and see me, to come and talk with me. And now I can't see you, the Buddha, I can't see Ananda anymore. I can't see any more of the disciples. And she wept with that. And the Buddha, who was up on Vulture's Peak, heard this somehow through his magical powers. And like that, chung, he appeared in her palace. And not just on his own, but with loads of bodhisattvas and gods, and the whole kind of Mahayana madness went on, and there was like loads and loads of flowers and all that kind of stuff all appeared. And yes, so what she said to the Buddha was, she said, please could you preach to me of a place where there is no suffering, where there aren't children like my son, and where there are no wicked sons, and please instruct me on how to meditate on a land where all actions are pure. And the Buddha showed her many pure lands, and she chose that she wanted to be reborn or appear in one that's called the world of highest happiness, Sukhavati. It's the Pure Land of the Buddha Amitabha. And the Buddha said, now, actually, the Buddha Amitabha is not very far from here. I can teach you some practices that will help you to be reborn in his Pure Land, to be with him. And actually it's very interesting because in the sutra it talks about practices which start with ethical actions, going for refuge to the Buddha, Sangha and Dharma, or placing the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, at the heart of our lives, studying the Dharma. And then he talks through various meditation practices. The first, which are lovely actually, some of them. The first one is to meditate on the setting sun. Just really bring that into your awareness. Maybe to sit and watch the sun set, and then to close your eyes and just to keep that sense of the sun's, the globe or the orb of the sun in your mind. And the second one was to meditate on clear, pure water, which I think is also quite beautiful, quite a lucid image in a way. Anyway, there are other practices. And towards the end of quite a long and quite flowery sutra, what the Buddha said was, okay, even if you don't do any of those things, if when you are dying, on your deathbed, you call out the name of Amitabha with a pure heart, with really strong faith, if you call out that name, you will be reborn in the presence of the Pure Land. Okay. So I think it's interesting to remember, as I go on with my talk, that the start of the sutra, the Buddha does talk about those kind of practices that we do being really important, actually. Okay. So, what is a Pure Land? So a Pure Land is, we might think of it as an alternative universe. It's been constructed by a Buddha through eons and eons of his practice of perfections. And everything in a Pure Land is conducive to attaining enlightenment. So people don't have to work, food just appears, clothes just appear, you're born full grown in a lotus, and there's all sorts of teaching going on. And there's lots of Buddhas have different Pure Lands as well. So it's not just Amitabha has a Pure Land, Akshobhya does, for instance. It's a very common Mahayana idea, the Pure Land. And there are many descriptions in the Mahayana Sutras of Pure Lands. So made of precious jewels, full of light, trees that are always in flower, lots of different beautiful flowers, beautiful pools of clear water, birds that sing to us about the Dharma, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas teaching under trees. Okay, and I think it's a particular, maybe an aspect of the Indian mind, I think, that the Pure Lands are really full of all these jewels, which kind of to the Western sensibility is a bit like, kind of sounds a bit tacky in a way. So maybe, instead of like, I don't know, I mean, if it works for you, for the jewels, emeralds, rubies, all that kind of stuff works for you, that's great. If not, maybe you can imagine like the most beautiful place you know, in the kind of weather we've been experiencing these last few days, with vivid colours, blue skies, beautiful flowers, that sense of peace that comes from being in such a beautiful place. Okay. So, as part of the Pure Land tradition, there are two really important sutras, actually, which describe both Amitabha and the Pure Land. So I just want to say a little bit about Amitabha. First of all, somewhat confusingly, remember the Pure Land tradition kind of started in India, moved to Japan, moved to China, I think, then moved to Japan. It's been around for many hundreds of years. So it's quite a complicated tradition, and I'm really only going to talk a very little bit about it. And although there is one figure who's really important, he goes by different names and kind of slightly different characteristics. So what I've written here is Amitabha, who is the Buddha of the West, the Buddha of the setting sun. This is an image of Amitabha from Padmaloka, from a retreat centre in Norfolk. Worth coming and have a look afterwards. He's the Buddha of infinite light, and he's a very compassionate Buddha. He's also a Buddha of meditation. But he has a big heart, he has a lot of love. His wisdom is to see what's unique about us all, and to love what's unique about us all. There's also a figure called Amitaeus, who's sometimes a Buddha, sometimes a Bodhisattva, kind of confusing, but he's about eternal life, okay? And he's often not seen so much as a monk like the Buddha is, but he's often in swirling robes, more kind of like a prince. And then in Japanese Buddhism, both these figures are kind of being brought together into a figure that they call Amida. So you might have heard of Amida Buddhism, that's Pure Land Buddhism. Okay? So really the important thing is just that we're talking kind of about figures that represent the same things. They represent light. They represent a kind of a sense of infinity as well, of things without an end, I suppose. Okay, and a sense of heart, definitely a sense of compassion and kindness as well. Okay. So I've kind of given you an idea from that story of where Pure Land grew from. And actually Pure Land was part of Buddhism right, in India for a long time. It wasn't until the 12th century in Japan that it became a separate tradition. And Shinran didn't start the tradition, but he took it up. So he was born in the 12th century, and he became a monk very early in his life. I think when he was a young boy, like 7 or 8, something like that. And both his parents died very young. So he has an experience of suffering quite young. And he went into a monastery, a very traditional monastery of that time, and he practiced very hard for 20 years. So he meditated, he did lots of ritual, he studied the wisdom, studied the Dharma, studied the meditation, studied the Dharma, worked really hard, and he felt that at the end of 20 years, he'd really just made no progress whatsoever. So he dedicated his life to this way of life, he'd dedicate everything in him, and it wasn't working. So he felt a great sense of despair, actually. He felt a great sense of, almost of humiliation, that he'd kind of given everything to this way of doing it, and it hadn't worked for him. So he also felt that in the monastery that he was in, things were very elitist. So it was only people who were from the upper classes, who had a very good education, who were able to take part in practicing the Buddhism at that time, just monks. Women didn't really do it, poorer people didn't do it, so it was mostly a kind of upper class men got to practice the Dharma, but other people didn't. And he also felt that in other ways it was a bit corrupt in his monastery as well, perhaps. So he looked to leave, and what he did is someone called Honen had started this school, Pure Land Buddhism, and he joined up with Honen and left his monastery. Interestingly, actually, it was very popular, Pure Land Buddhism. Honen's school grew, and the government didn't like it. The government at the time, I'm not sure exactly who that was, but the people that were in charge felt very threatened by Pure Land Buddhism, and sent Honen into exile, sent Shinran into exile, and executed a few other Pure Land people. I think it's really interesting, actually, this is a kind of aside, because it's interesting that, if I say to someone I'm a Buddhist, the normal reaction is people go, oh, that's really nice. Yeah? It's like it's not seen as at all an issue or a problem. It's like a really nice thing to be doing, Like there's nothing challenging or threatening to them in me being a Buddhist. And actually, I think they should feel threatened. I think the powers that be should feel it. I'd feel better if people were kind of a bit more concerned about it. Because actually, Buddhism isn't just about being nice to people, even though that's very good. It's actually a very radical, different way of seeing the world. So yes, I'd like it if those kind of people went, ooh. But I hope they don't send us into exile and execute us and stuff. That would be really extreme. Okay. So Shinran had been stopped from being a monk. He stopped being a monk, and he married. And he moved into a very remote fishing village. So he lived with people who earned their living from fishing, from farming. They were illiterate people, uneducated people. And he carried on, he married, had children, but he carried on teaching the Dharma. And what he wanted to develop was a way of practicing the Dharma that was open to everybody. And it didn't matter if you were a man or a woman, if you were rich or poor, educated or not, you could practice. And I think that's something, that way of looking at Buddhism, we have in common with that. Because I hope that in our movement, we want to be open to everybody, and we want everyone to be able to practice who wants to. It's not about whether, just an elite practicing Buddhism. Okay. Now he's very humble, Shinran. He didn't see himself as starting a new school at all. He just saw himself as the disciple of his teacher. But he was very popular. He was very popular with the people around him. And gradually around him, there grew up a school of Buddhism. So what did he say? Okay, Okay, I probably don't actually understand it because I don't practice Pure Land Buddhism, and I think it's a particularly specific way of looking at the world, and I'm only going to be able to talk about parts of it. But basically, so it's a tradition that's based on other power, as it's called. Okay, so it's based on opening yourself up to other power, which is represented by Amida. And the argument is that we need to do that because if we try and use our own ego, our own self to practice, well, that's just full of kind of self-clinging. We're trying to use the self to get out of something. We're kind of trying to use the self to get rid of itself, if you see what I mean. So you can't do that. If you try and use this kind of very ego type of yourself to get out of that, it's just going to hang on to things and it's going to keep creating a sense of difference from others. So it's counterproductive. And there's a word, hakurai, Japanese word, probably haven't said it right, which I quite like. And hakurai is calculating mind. Okay, it's a kind of mind where we're arranging, we're planning the world. It's the small mind, the mind of the ego. And it's about manipulating the world for our own benefit and other people for our own benefit. And you could call it the mind of self-power in some ways. And actually, even if we do good acts, we will often have some what's called double-mindedness. So, for instance, if I'm generous to somebody, okay, example, Sunday I helped someone look for her lost cat. Great, very generous of me because I actually wanted to go swimming, but I did it. Okay, but there you go. Just in what I just said, you can pick up on my ego going, wow, I wanted to go swimming, but actually I helped someone look for her lost cat. Do you see what I mean? It's like it was good that I helped to look for a cat. It was beneficial, it was good of me to want to do it. But I picked up on it straight away to think of myself as this, really kind person who did that. And we can do it with meditation as well. We can do it with meditation experiences. We can have some big experience, we come out and we go, wow, I'm fantastic. I'm the kind of person who has these really amazing meditation experiences. And, okay, it's completely human to do that, but you can see how it is that we will appropriate these things to build up a sense of ourself as being fantastic all the time. Or we might appropriate things to make us build up a sense of ourselves as being rubbish, okay? Might be, oh God, I'm really this, I'm really that, I'm really bad. That's still creating a sense of yourself as different from the rest. Do you see what I mean? Thinking of yourself in a bad way, having low self-esteem, can be just as problematic or troubling as thinking of yourself as fantastic. Okay. So what Shinran and the other Pure Land teachers said is we just can't get out of this sort of trap we're in by doing it ourselves. Because it's like trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can't do it. Something bigger than you has got to help you change. You have to have recourse to what's called other power. And this is what Amida represents. Okay. So basically what Shinran said is that if we call on Amida with faith, with all our heart, we can be reborn in a Pure Land. And teachers before that had said you could be born in a Pure Land when you died, but he actually said we could be born in a Pure Land at any time. And I think there is a kind of real mythic truth in that, actually. That if only we could open ourselves up, we could open up our hearts, we could let go of this false infrastructure we build, this false sense of self, we would experience the world as a Pure Land. But it's a big, I can see it, but how you do it feels really hard to me. Okay, so we'll come back to that later. But I just wanted to, if you've got loads of fantastic ideas, actually, but I just wanted to introduce the idea of a bombu, just a bit of an aside, actually, which is a great idea of the Pure Land. So a bombu is a really stupid being, okay? Not just a bit silly, but just completely deluded and really stupid. And from the point of view of the enlightened mind, of Amitabha, of Amida, we are all bombus. We're just completely silly and we're completely deluded. And I just find that really liberating, actually. I just think, I make some mistakes. Not surprising. I'm a bit of a bombu, really. And if you're a bombu, you can't get yourself out of the mess, all you can do is call on someone else to help you. Okay. Now, this might be feeling very un-Buddhist. This idea that you call on Amida to get you out of the mess you're in. Okay, it might be sounding a bit like praying to God. Okay. Now it's important to remember that, Amida is not a creationist God. Amitabha, he hasn't created the world, and he's not a judging God either, okay? So it's not the same as the Christian God at all. I think more what he's expressing in a kind of mythical form is the way that reality actually is. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to explain this, but basically we've got an idea that in here and out there is different. I'm separate. In here, my experience is separate from out there. And that's a seriously wrong view, the Buddha said. So that I have this idea that I'm separate somehow from everything else. So there's an order member called Kulananda who puts this quite well, I think. He says that as we practice, we may begin to see that the notion of me that I've constructed and that I spend so much time feeding and defending is not the final boundary of existence. Reality is actually far greater than this sense of me. I'll just say that again. So the notion of me that I've constructed and that I spend so much time, like all my time really, feeding, defending, trying to get a sense of it, it's not the final boundary of existence. Reality is much bigger than I am. So in fact, Amida, in the sense of this, could be said to represent that ultimate reality, to be this greater reality. And in fact, in some ways, Amitabha could be said, Amida could be said to be as real, if not more real, than I think of myself to be. Okay, so I might leave it there. But I suppose what I'm trying to say, it's a bit like we have a false view, self and other, that they're different things. And actually, we're all part of one interconnected existence. We're all part of a flow of conditions that are happening all the time. And we try and freeze it. I try and create a Satyajyoti who kind of has particular things that she does and doesn't do. And then I try and defend that, and I get really upset if anybody challenges my idea of what I am. Now, the reality of how things are is very different. And sometimes by actually calling this other power a name, calling it Amida, Amitabha, by almost making it into a being, we can actually start to break through that false barrier we've got between me and other. So maybe to help with this, it might be useful to look at the 3 myths of spiritual practice. So the idea is, here's the Buddha, I love the Buddha. Here's us. And there's like a difference between me and how the Buddha is, the qualities of the Buddha. The Buddha is compassionate, the Buddha understands reality, the Buddha is full of energy for the good, and I'm me, with greed, hatred and delusion. How do I get from this to the Buddha? And actually, of course, well, I don't know, because I don't really know what it is like to be a Buddha, so I can't really work out how it would happen. But there are 3 different myths, you could say, of ways that we can practice that will take us. So the first is the myth of self-development. Now this one you'll be very familiar with, because this is the myth where we ourselves meditate every day, we try and set up a meditation practice, we practice ethics, we study. We have a sense of me, Satyajyoti, is doing stuff, okay? I'm just, working to develop myself, to grow myself in stages. There's another myth, which is the myth of self-discovery. So this is, within me is the potential to become a Buddha. Buddha nature. It's the potential, the seed, to become a Buddha. And I can get in touch with that, I can open myself up to that, and I can allow that to grow. So that's the kind of myth of spiritual practice as self-discovery. And the third way of looking at it is self-surrender. So that's where I give myself up to something bigger. So Shinran's school of faith is very much the school of self-surrender. It's about getting ourselves out of the way, opening ourselves up to something bigger. And actually, all these 3 ways of practice, they have good sides and bad sides. Self-development is really good, if you're a self-disciplined kind of person, which I'm not, so. And definitely at the beginning of our practice, self-development is very much the way that we work. You know, it's like we need to set up our own meditation practice. We need to be very aware of ourselves acting ethically. But as Shinran said, it can actually have, it has dangers with it. It's a bit like we could be building up a stronger sense of ourselves. Yeah, it isn't helpful. We could really, and it can feel a bit like it can be a bit of me as well, self-development. It can be a bit kind of just self-referential. Self-discovery, well, I think the downside of that is if we were to think, hey, I'm a Buddha already, fantastic, don't need to do anything. And apparently people did used to think like that in the 60s and 70s, and it was a problem really for people who were trying to practice. So but I think as our practice goes on, self-discovery does become more of it. It's like, I was thinking that actually, sometimes when I do the metta bhavana, you might have this experience as well, it's a bit like I'm opening up to some sense of metta that's there already. I'm certainly not trying to create metta. That feels really weird. It's like I'm opening up to the metta that is there already. And so self-surrender. Self-surrender is this way that we give up to something bigger. Actually, self-surrender can happen just in, maybe if you're doing the mindfulness of breathing. In a way, we have to let go of ourselves, let go of all those thoughts, all those kind of things, and just be with the breath. So actually doing the practice of mindfulness of breathing can be just a practice of self-surrender, of surrendering to the moment. Mindfulness can be a practice of self-surrender, letting go of who we think we are, letting go of all that kind of thoughts of the past and the future, and just being with what's happening right now. Okay, so what Shinran suggests that we do with self-surrender is that we chant. So the Pure Land practice is to chant Namo Amida Butsu. And Namo is a bit like, you know, when we go Namo, I reverence. Amida, we talked about Amida Buddha. So it's a bit like, here I am, I'm paying reverence to something much bigger than me. And it can be translated as, I take refuge in the Buddha Amitabha. It can be translated as, I entrust myself to the awakening of infinite light. I entrust myself. So it's a letting go into. It's not that we ourselves are doing anything. We are going to entrust ourselves into this process, this natural process of awakening. And Shinran is very strong on the fact that this is a response. So it's not a method. So you don't chant this in order to get enlightened. You chant it with gratitude. So because Buddha Amitabha is there, and he's enlightened, and he's going to help us to be reborn in a pure land, we have gratitude. And so we chant this in response to that from gratitude. And the way of Shinran then is the way of faith, the way of what's called Shinjen. So Shinjen is about entrusting the heart. Okay, it's this idea of we entrust the heart. I suppose the whole way that Shinran saw the world was in a very emotional way. It was very much about our emotions, our responses, the response of our heart. And so Shin bit is translated as Shraddha or as faith. So now I'm going to just talk a little bit about Shraddha. And Shraddha really is one of the best words, one of those words we really ought to just use in Sanskrit or Pali, I suppose, because we translate it as faith, and that's so not what it is, actually. Especially when I was preparing for this talk, I became aware of all these kind of ideas I have around faith, and Shin or Shraddha is really not that. So we're going to do a bit of a kind of, what's it called? Etymology? Yes, we're going to explore. That sounds like some sort of insects, actually. We're going to explore the meaning of Shraddha. So, Shraddha, so this bit comes from Sanskrit, which is shrat. And what that means is heart. Okay, it simply means heart. And it's related to the Greek word cardia, you know, like cardiologist. So cardia, heart, and to the Latin word core, which I think went on to make words like courageous and things like that. So it's very much a word that means heart. And actually it's also cognated, it says, with Sat, from Satya, which I really like because my name is Satyajyoti. So it's cognated with Satya, truth, and Da is about placing or setting something. So Shraddha is where we place our heart. It's where we place our heart. Okay, so I'll say that again. Shraddha is about where we place our heart. So what Shraddha absolutely isn't about is believing 3 difficult things before breakfast kind of thing. It's not about belief. So it's interesting that these days religions seem to get talked about as faiths. And I think what they mean is they put together all these kind of people who believe really weird things. I don't know if that's where it comes from. I hope it doesn't. You know, and it's a bit like with faith, we can see it as like we're being asked to believe in something which is just absurd. It's just obviously not true. And in a way, what you have to do to become involved in a religion is you have to say that you believe in those things. And the whole point of it, as you can see, they're a bit absurd, you know. And that is, you know, Shraddha is absolutely not about that at all. So from now on, I don't want to use the word faith anymore, okay? I'm going to try and use the word Shraddha all the time. I'm going to try and make it like metta is. You know, like we all use the word metta. So you can heckle me. So if I use the word faith, which is quite likely, heckle me, and we'll have the word Shraddha instead. Okay. Yeah. And so what we put our hearts on. And it's not just the heart, I suppose it's also the head. It's all of ourselves. It's that experience when we respond to something higher than us, something beyond us, something beautiful, something transcendental. And that, you know, it can urge a desire, a longing that we want to give ourselves to whatever it is that's so beautiful, that's really touched our hearts. Sangha Night, who's the founder of the Triratna Buddhist movement, says, Shraddha is the response of what is ultimate in ourselves to what is ultimate in the universe. The response of what is ultimate in ourselves to what is ultimate in the universe. So in Buddhist terms, we describe that as the response, ourselves vibrating, ourselves resonating with the Buddha and everything that he represents, with his teaching, the Dharma, with the Sangha, his community. So it's ourselves responding at our deepest level to something really beautiful, something awesome in the universe. And as I said, it's not just your traditionally, there's 3 aspects to Shraddha, which Vedanta calls the heart, the head, and the gut. And I suppose you could say these are emotional, cognitive, and volitional. It's another way of saying them. They're really well explained, if you're interested in it. There's a Mitra study course on faith and imagination, which you can get just on Free Buddhist Audio, the website. And if you're interested in this, it describes it really well. Basically, I'm talking from that from now on. So let's start. So heart, or lucid faith, is very much what comes from the tradition of Shinran. And I'm going to go back to that. Well spotted! I should have brought some sweets in first. So Shraddha. So lucid Shraddha. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to come back to that, finish with that. But let's start with head Shraddha. So this is confident Shraddha. This is knowing about the truth. Sangha actually describes it as a profound conviction and understanding of truths and principles. It's a kind of Shraddha where we have a deep sense of rightness about the Dharma, for instance. And we know that a teaching is right. And we kind of might have a sense we've always known it as well. Like I know when I first started practicing, I went along because I was really stressed and all that, went to meditation, couldn't meditate. But when I heard people teaching the Dharma, I just thought, yes, they're putting into words what I've kind of intuited but never been able to express. So there's just definitely kind of this sense of Shraddha. That's what I could feel my heart moving towards those teachings. And in fact, you know, we sometimes don't even know what something means, and we can feel this sense. So the Heart Sutra, I don't know if you've chanted that in a 7-fold puja, it's like, I don't know what it means, but I always feel, well, usually feel anyway, a really strong sense of Shraddha. I feel very moved by it, but I think, yes, it's true, even though I don't know what it is. But anyway, so it's like we can have this kind of response. And a kind of at a more down-to-earth level, having a sense of having this Shraddha, this confident Shraddha, this knowing Shraddha, is really important, actually, because it just means that we understand what we're kind of going towards, because there are all sorts of weird ideas out there, and some of them might attract us, actually. It doesn't mean they're true, okay? So it's a bit like it is important that we actually explore ideas. And it's interesting, again, because I'm a Buddhism, people sometimes think that I believe all sorts of stuff, kind of all sorts of new agey stuff. And they might be true, I don't know, but things like auras, and maybe auras are true, I don't know, but people have kind of presumed that I'd believe in that, and I don't know if I do, actually. So it's kind of like we need to explore. We don't just openly, we don't just kind of, without thinking about it, without using our intellect, just accept everything. This is very much using our intellect, our reason, to understand what's important to us. Okay, then another form of Shraddha is gut Shraddha, volition or longing Shraddha. It's a nice word, isn't it? Longing. So this is the desire, the aspiration to attain and realise what is good. Okay, so this is the moving towards we want to become enlightened. And very importantly, we believe it's possible for us as well. Because if there's like me here and the Buddha there, and there's such a distance that I just don't think I can make it, well, I'm not going to really actually feel like practicing. It's like we need to have a volition, a will to move with something. So it's the desire, the longing to move towards the qualities we admire, and then the second is that we believe that we can do it. And actually, I suppose the practical outcome of this longing faith is... The practical outcome of is to actually to do something. It's to commit. It's to commit. And I felt last week when I watched the Mitra ceremony, and there's the bit where everybody makes their offerings. And it could well be that the people who are becoming Mitras weren't particularly in touch with it at that time, because it was such a big public occasion. But I felt it expressed really beautiful. You know, when people kind of offered candles and flowers and incense, that's a kind of expression of Shraddha. It's an expression of getting in touch with something bigger than ourselves, of wanting to move towards it. And so expressing it in that kind of way of making offerings actually is an expression of our Shraddha, of our wish to move, to be in touch with what really inspires us. Yeah. And it might, it might lead us to doing all sorts of things, setting up businesses, living in communities, all kind of things might flow out of our Shraddha, living in certain ways, making changes to our lives. And this is absolutely not Buddhist, whatever, but the kind of word I use it for myself, this kind of volition thing, it's kind of like that mojo thing. So, kind of in like blues songs, that kind of mojo means something quite specific, kind of sexually. But I think it's that kind of, that you want to do something, you're moved to do something, you feel it, you want to get going. It's a kind of move, a drive towards. So I think it's kind of like this longing Shraddha. It's very much that kind of feeling of, what it's like when you've lost your mojo, and it's like it's getting the mojo back and going with the mojo. Okay, so let's just finish off with the heart Shraddha, lucid Shraddha as it's called. So this is an intense fondness, it's traditionally what it's called, but fondness doesn't really feel quite right. It's an intense love for the qualities of compassion, of wisdom, of energy. It's of enlightenment. And it's about loving what is good. So it's the feeling heart aspect of Shraddha. It's our emotional response. Response in other people, in teachings. Yeah, and the Sanskrit of it, they use the word prasada, which means lucid, which means light, which means happy, bright. So it's definitely a sense of brightness, a sense of lightness, a sense of serenity. So that's why it's called lucid Shraddha. And it's interesting because Shraddha is said to purify the mind. And it's traditionally likened to this idea of a water purifying gem. So if the water's all really dirty and muddy, and you stick one of these water purifying gems in, it goes really clear. And that's what Shraddha can do for us. It can allow our mind to be very clear, very lucid, full of light. Because if we are actually allowing ourselves to be in touch with what really inspires us, the rest of all that rubbish that gets in the way isn't in our mind at that point. It's as simple as that, really. It's like we can experience, we can feel. that sense of lucidity, that sense of clarity. Yeah. So we're not plagued by doubt, we're not plagued by anxiety, or things. Our mind is serene, it's happy, and it's bright. And so lucid Shraddha can be described as our response to spiritual beauty. So it's the beauty of higher values, beauty of character, of people, and it's very strongly related to that aesthetic sense by which we appreciate beauty in the world. Quite a few things in common. So in a way, they're both kind of outside logical reasoning. Because, you know, some things are beautiful. I don't really know why that is. I don't know why a beautiful, clear blue sky makes me feel that's really beautiful, that's really happy, I feel my heart opening. I don't really know why that is. I mean, there may be all sorts of reasons that you could rationalise about the way we all evolved as human beings or something like that. But basically, it sort of feels like it's a very kind of, it's beyond this kind of rational explanation. And again, we can't explain really why metta is beautiful and hatred is ugly. It's just, we kind of know at some level that that is the case. So there's kind of a very strong link, I think, between beauty, our sort of aesthetic sense and our spiritual sense of Shraddha. And actually both those senses, of course, are stronger when we're in a positive state. So when I feel really good, things seem more beautiful, and also I can feel much more of a sense of Shraddha, much more in touch with what's important to me. And both faculties can be developed by practice. So although they seem to be natural to us, we can actually develop them if we want to. So, if we're not used to listening, like I'm not particularly used to listening to classical music, because I don't really understand how it works. But I have put a bit of effort in, kind of intermittently, and it's like I can now start to understand more what's going on. But I have been to a few concerts, and I can actually start to understand classical music more, and I can actually appreciate, not just intellectually, but in my heart, the beauty of the music in a very different way, in a way I couldn't before. So it's like we can learn to appreciate, and in fact, all sorts of kind of art, we need to learn how to appreciate, how to understand them. And we can practice that. And it's the same with lucid Shraddha. So we can become more practiced about perceiving spiritual beauty and about allowing it to grow, allowing it to develop. And it's interesting, actually, that I don't know who wrote it, but anyway, maybe Sangha Night just said that lucid Shraddha can be seen as lifting of the heart. It can be seen as what happens when our metta meets something that's higher than us. So you might have heard of the Brahma Viharas. We do talk about it on the intermediate course, which is where metta meets suffering, has a certain response. Metta meets other people's joy, has a certain response. So we're talking about a similar thing here. Our metta, our love, compassion, our friendliness meets something higher than us. And from that, this sense of Shraddha grows. And we can experience sort of love, admiration, delight, devotion, awe. It's very pleasurable, Shraddha. That's the fantastic thing about it. It's very much like it's the very pleasurable part of our spiritual practice. Yes, but of course Shraddha, as I said before, actually does need to change our lives if it's to mean anything. And we all have tastes of Shraddha. We all have tastes of this getting in touch with something bigger, getting in touch with the beautiful, feeling really inspired, feeling our heart move towards something. But what we can do is we can put some effort, it's not a very Shinran thing to say, but anyway, I'm going to say it, we can put some effort into developing and allowing it to grow. Shraddha is a bit of a quiet little voice sometimes. It's that still, quiet voice that's easily drowned out by lots of things in life. So it can be drowned out by too much input, music, TV, doing too much, being busy all the time. We lose touch with what's important to us. So really, in order for it to develop, we need to give ourselves solitude, meditation time, reflection time. And actually, some of us need to kind of overcome some kind of conditioning. Because it might be that we've not really been particularly supported in looking for that in our lives when we were children or as we've been growing up. It's not something that our society generally encourages. Those, when we do have a feeling of awe, of love, of Shraddha. So we can look for it and we can allow it to grow, be open to it. And obviously developing a sense of beauty, being beautiful with art, being in nature, probably these last few days with this fantastic weather, we may have experienced some of those feelings of just delight, of being in a beautiful sky, beautiful nature, the colours, just that kind of sense. Being in nature is a really good way to allow our Shraddha to develop. Who we spend time with is really important as well, because we always pick up on what's going on around us. Well, I certainly do. And I suppose I can feel my, like this is such a silly example, but anyway, an example is, years ago when I was training for ordination, so it's a really big part of my life, I went away for a weekend where I learned how to do first aid for people in the outdoors. And everyone else who was on that weekend was studying for this thing called their Mountain Leadership Badge, which I had never had any interest before in my life. Because I just spent a weekend with people doing their Mountain Leadership Badge, by the end I was like, right, I'm going to do my Mountain Leadership Badge, and then I can, take all these Buddhists on walks and stuff. So I kind of rationalised itself. But basically all it was, the conditions I was in, the people I was with, what they were putting their energy and their heart into was their Mountain Leadership Badges. So I just naturally, as a person, kind of went into it. Yeah? And I don't know if you've had that experience, Yeah, just like, you go and visit somebody who's really into their house, and I kind of come away thinking, oh, I must redecorate my house. And it's just the way that we are as human beings. So it's about, like, if we choose to be with people like the Sangha, like friends who have the same interests as us, we are much more likely to allow our Shraddha for the highest things in life, for the deepest things in life. They will flourish. Meditation, of course. And I think mindfulness, it's really interesting. As I said before, I think mindfulness is definitely a way that Shraddha develops, because we are with what's really going on right now when we're mindful. And we hopefully have in mind what our purpose is. So we have a sense of being in touch with reality as it is right now and where we're trying to go. So I think mindfulness can be a really strong practice of Shraddha. And it's interesting, I don't know if you have the same experience, but I can have a sense of, if I'm able to be mindful of something, even if it is theoretically quite ugly, I can find it quite beautiful. It's quite interesting that I can be in certain places that seem quite ugly. If I can just take a few deep breaths and really let them come into my awareness, I can see the beauty in them. And they can be quite strong, very strong sometimes, how that can be. Going on retreat. Fantastic way to develop Shraddha. You're with other people. Actually, this is a really good advert for the Locker Book retreats. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful place. You can't guarantee the weather. Do lots of meditation, do some study of the Dharma. All that really helps our Shraddha to develop. And I think there are some people here who've had the experience of being on retreat, and it's there that they've decided they want to kind of continue, make their commitment to their Buddhist practice. Yeah. I think another thing that's really important is developing gratitude. Now it's interesting that Shinran said that when he, when you say the Nam Amida Butsu, you're doing it from gratitude. And I think that's because gratitude is an incredibly important and powerful way of seeing the world, and it turns around so much of our conditioning. And I think just on a psychological level, many people find it really helpful to write down 4 or 5 things every day that they're grateful for. It's really recommended for people who are depressed or anxious to just keep in touch with what they're grateful for. It turns around all that conditioning we've got all the time, which is kind of saying, I should want this, I want that, I want this, then it will be all right. It's kind of going, let's start with what I already have, what the world is already giving to me. And it was interesting because it's, I did it last night, and I just wrote down the first thing, which was something like, the ability to access on the internet all this stuff that I've been saying to you, basically, with just, just kind of click a few buttons and there it all comes up. And I'm like, wow, the conditions that have gone into creating that, all those people who've written the stuff in the first place, and then some people translated it, and some people put it online, and there's all the people who developed the internet. It just leads you into, it stops being just a psychological practice, actually. It is a wisdom practice, because gratitude leads you into interconnectedness and a sense of the kind of web of different conditions that we live in, of the way that the world is giving to us, the way that Amitabha, you could say, is giving to us all the time. And another way, actually, to develop Shraddha is to connect with the refuge tree. So it's really good that we're doing this whole year-long series on the refuge tree, because these figures, some of them are enlightened, and basically their teachings have come down to us. And without their teachings, without the Buddha at the heart, and then all the other figures, we wouldn't have what we have. So that's why we explore these figures, and we hear about their life stories. Hopefully we're inspired by their life stories. That can really help us to develop a sense of this of lucid Shred heart, of our heart going out to these figures and what they've achieved. We want to be like them. Okay, so I have no idea what time it is. Okay, so I feel that the talk's coming to an end, really. So we've looked at Shinran to some extent, and I feel like I could have given about 4 talks on Shinran. I just touched a little bit on what he's talking about, and some ideas of the Pure Land tradition as I understand it. And then from that, we've looked at these 3 forms of Shraddha. So this sense that putting our heart on what is most important to us, where we put our heart, this sense of what in us is in resonance with the universe, with the best things in the universe. And we've looked at 3 different ways that we might express those. So with our head, understanding the Dharma, understanding the ideas, with our heart, and with our guts. It's kind of like actually getting going, being inspired to do something with our Shraddha. And, yeah. And I suppose it's kind of quite easy to kind of think, to almost look forward. It's a bit like I kind of went, oh, wow. I suppose the kind of people at the time, the Pure Land tradition was very alive, maybe in Japan now. They could be looking forward to this time when they were reborn in the future. It could all be about, in the future, this will happen. And what Shinran said, actually, is actually the Pure Land is here already. If only we could see it. If only we had the lucid mind of Shraddha, we would be living in a Pure Land right now.